and welcome to Need to Know, the programme that keeps you up to date on the big issues in the world of education. In this programme, we look at the changes to the requirements for healthy eating in schools and the new regulations on school dinners. Here to explain what they are and how they work is Mike Baker. There's a long, complicated story behind this. Give us a potted history of school meals, can you?
Well, yes, I think a little bit of history will help, because when people complain about the nanny state, they should remember that the idea of nationally imposed standards for school meals goes way back. It was actually 1870 when school meals first began. But perhaps we should start in 1941, when we had the first nutritional standards introduced, stipulating levels of protein, fat and calories. So in 1947 it was decided that the full cost of school meals should be met by the government. This was a high watermark, but politics changed and deregulation became the new fashion, resulting in the Education Act of 1980, which abolished nutritional standards and sought to reduce the cost to the taxpayer of school meals.
So was it that drive to cut costs that decreased the quality of what was being provided in schools?
I think it was. This was the era of competitive tendering, and very much the onus was on lowest bid wins. So school prices came down for the meals themselves, therefore the cost, the money that was spent on ingredients went down, and we had a bit of a spiral really. Let's hear from Michael Nelson of the School Food Trust.
The very low standards of provision that had existed before the introduction of the new legislation had an awful lot to do with the financial drivers in the absence of anything to do with nutrition or good health. So it was just the cheapest food available that children would buy in the dining room, and not having any consideration for better health meant that it was only going to be the cheapest options, the things that the caterers themselves could guarantee that children would eat, and that was why it boiled down very often to burgers and chips and pizza every day, and very little variety.
Well, bring us up to date. What's changed?
Well, the change of government was, I suppose, the most obvious thing. That did bring the return of some nutritional standards in 2001, but frankly these were not very demanding. Then of course in 2005 we had Jamie Oliver's School Dinners programme, and suddenly healthy eating was back on the political menu and the School Meals Review Panel was set up. It proposed new standards, and since 2006 these have started to be phased in. They're being introduced bit by bit, so it'll be 2009 before they're fully in place.
So what do the new nutritional standards require?
Well, first of all, some things like fizzy drinks and chocolate bars are banned. There was also a requirement for certain things to be on all menus, such as fruit and vegetables. This takes things much further than the 2001 changes, which simply required schools to offer healthy options. But as we know, children didn't necessarily take them up. Here's Michael Nelson again.
The changes that have been introduced with the legislation are quite comprehensive. They go further than the previous set of standards that were introduced in 2001 that related just to availability of the healthier foods in the dining room and left it up to the children to choose those foods. Now it's more prescriptive in terms of the balance of food that's available in the dining room for children to choose from. So it's now more choice within healthy options, which is one of the reasons, for example, that soft drinks and confectionery are no longer allowed in schools. It wasn't reflecting what the children were learning about healthy eating in the classroom, and yet they were being asked to make a choice in the dining room about what was going to be good for them and what was not.
More prescriptive standards. What's the detail on this?
OK, well, there's plenty of it. We now have two types of minimum standards required of school food. The first, food-based standards, define the types of food that children should be offered. The second type, nutrient-based standards, are more detailed and set out the proportion of nutrients that must be found in school lunches. And there's a strict timetable for these requirements. There was recognition that it takes time to change deep-seated eating habits, so they've built up the standards slowly, with new requirements coming each year from 2006 to 2009. The first interim food standards started in 2006. These covered just school lunches. Then in 2007 they were extended to cover all other food served in breakfast clubs, tuck shops, vending machines or after-school clubs. Final food-based standards will be introduced in September 2008 in primary schools and the following year in secondary and special schools. The food standards state that some things must be included and other foodstuffs must be limited or excluded. So, for instance, there is a requirement for a minimum of 2 servings of fruit and vegetables, of which 1 should be veg and 1 should be fruit daily. and oily fish such as salmon or mackerel at least once every 3 weeks. Bread with no added fat or oil on a daily basis, and there should be easy access to free, fresh drinking water at all times. So that's an example of what schools must provide. Now to what they mustn't, those things banned or restricted. The exclusion and restrictions say, for example, no table salt, no sugary fizzy drinks, no confectionery such as chocolate bars, manufactured meat products, that's bangers and burgers and the like, must meet minimum legal meat content levels, and no more than 2 deep-fried items should be provided in a week.
Now, all that detail is on the food-based standards. When do the more rigorous nutrient standards come in?
Well, for primary school lunches, the nutrient-based standards, like the final food-based standards, come into effect from September 2008, and for secondary and special schools from September 2009. These will mean that it won't be enough for schools to simply offer the types of food we've mentioned, but they'll have to go further and meet specific nutritional standards across the school week. That means things like the minimum amount of proteins, vitamins and minerals. As you can tell, here's where things get very complicated. But fortunately, I have someone here who can help explain. Kerry Torrens is a nutritional therapist. Now, we've got some visual aids here. Let's start with this plate here of burger and chips. What's wrong with that?
Well, this typical tray contains a lot of fat, saturated fat, salt and sugar, nutrients that children tend to consume a lot of, and actually are leading to a rise in obesity and weight problems. It also doesn't contain an awful lot of micronutrients. Now, these are nutrients that are important for growth, development and a healthy immune system.
It is the sort of thing I can remember seeing from school dinners in the past, but hopefully this is what we're going to see much more in the future. Much healthier looking ingredients here, but why? What's good about these things?
These foods contain the micronutrients. They contain things like iron, zinc, nutrients that are typically low at the moment in children's diets. At the moment, we know that children eat less than their 5 a day recommended portions of fruit and vegetables. In fact, they tend to have less than half of that. Really? So by promoting those foods in the meals that they have at school, we can contribute towards growth, development, protect them from infections and help their behaviour and learning as well.
OK, so these are good things with good ingredients and good constituent parts, but how do you make sure that children eat them?
Right, well, it's important to obviously promote healthy selection. So the new food standards and nutrient standards do that. They try and promote healthier options on the menus. But also to encourage children to actually eat more nutrient-dense foods, we can include things like seeds and oats on crumble toppings, for example, for desserts.
So it's hiding things a little bit.
It is, but also if you have unpopular ingredients like oily fish, that can be included with a more favourable ingredient like pasta, so pasta and salmon, for example. Or even including items like oily fish as a main meal when more popular desserts are available, like a sponge pudding. So the children still have the meal, but they're waiting for the sponge pudding.
I'm glad to hear there's still going to be sponge pudding. Now, there's still a problem, isn't there, about persuading children to take it, and indeed parents too, because we've seen these pictures, haven't we, of parents passing junk through school gates. What's the problem going on here?
I think that there's a lot of interest in this area at the moment, and it's not just to do with school meals. Obviously, the government's trying to fight obesity as well, and so it's more to do with looking at parental attitudes to food and also the convenience of fast food outlets. I think with parents that a lot of suspicion arose around school meals following the negative publicity from Jamie Oliver's campaign. And following that, a lot of parents chose to send their children with packed lunches to school.
So how do you make sure you get packed lunches healthily? Quite quickly, I'm afraid.
Well, the government is working with the School Foods Trust to promote policies in school, and these policies will work very much in line with the food standards themselves. So the idea is that the parents will actually send packed lunches which follow food standards.
Kerry, thank you very much.
Thank you.
This seems like a big challenge for schools.
It is a big challenge, not just for the reasons we've heard there from Kerry about changing attitudes amongst parents and children, but also because of this change over the past few years as there was a decline in school meals. A lot of schools ripped out their kitchens, so that's got to be replaced. We've also got issues of training for catering staff. They've got to get used to all these new requirements, and that's quite a big issue too. Fortunately, the School Food Trust thinks that most staff involved in catering will relish that challenge. Let's hear again from Michael Nelson.
We know that over a number of years, cooks in the kitchen have actually been de-skilled. They've not been asked to cook interesting food in the kitchen, and it's one of their great laments. They went to become cooks because they enjoyed cooking, and getting back to that, I think, is a great motivation for many people in the kitchen now, for many of the staff there. And the School Feast program, which has just been launched by Ed Balls and supported and implemented by the School Food Trust, is a program aimed very specifically at the cooks and the catering staff to improve their skills again and to make sure that they're well equipped to prepare the range of foods from scratch that are part and parcel of a healthy diet.
And there's more. Teaching children the practical skills of cookery is back on the menu, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Because in January this year, the government announced compulsory cooking lessons for every pupil. From 2011, every 11 to 14-year-old will be given practical lessons in how to make meals from simple, fresh ingredients. At present, around 85% of secondary schools already have facilities in place as they provide food technology classes. These schools will be expected to have compulsory cooking classes from this September. And in all other secondary schools, children will have what the government are calling a licence to cook, meaning they will have the option of cooking at after-school clubs or neighbouring schools. Teachers' leaders have pointed out that this is just one of several extra requirements placed upon schools just at a time when the government is also saying it wants to free up the compulsory curriculum to allow more flexibility. Others, though, have welcomed the change. Here's Michael Nelson.
We really welcome the introduction of a compulsory component to cooking in schools. It used to be there and then gradually disappeared as there were other pressures on the curriculum. There was a reintroduction last September of a license to cook, and now making that compulsory for 11 to 14-year-olds is going to be a real advantage in terms of children leaving school knowing how to prepare good, healthy food for themselves.
So a lot of required change and more to come, but will it really make a difference when outside school life and diet is a challenge for many?
Well, we've already referred to the problem of parents who pass junk through school gates, so that's an issue. There's a lot of attitudes that will need to be changed. But some people are quite optimistic. Let's hear from Barbara Hearn of the National Children's Bureau.
In my generation, when I was at school, we learned cooking, we learned about nutrition in great detail. Generations that have come since haven't had that opportunity, which leaves us with a generation of parents who don't have the advantage of knowing and understanding perhaps as much about nutrition as their children need them to. So if there are ways in which schools can bring parents in to share the learning, or ways in which services can go out and help parents understand, and there's no harm in the pupils who learn in school about nutrition going home and teaching their parents some new tricks. So it does need an exchange between generations, which will be a good thing.
That seems a tad optimistic, I think. Can you imagine parents taking lessons from their children?
Well, I think it's possible. And after all, remember, the current generation of parents are the ones who had those awful burger and chips like we saw earlier in the 80s. So it does involve parents learning from their children.
Well, that's what you need to know about school meals and healthy eating. Until next time, from Mike Baker and from me, goodbye.